What we saw in Daniel's vision, Genesis 22, and John 3, and what we're going to see here in Exodus 32 is in all of these stories, the ascending, the descending, the Son of Man stuff, you're going to see a lot of similar things. Number one, you're going to see God loves you so much that he sent his one and only Son into the world. But what does this really mean? John 3:16 is the most popular verse, hands down. But what many do not realize is that in John chapter 3, Jesus is referencing two key stories in the Old Testament. Specifically when Jesus says, no one ascends into heaven except he who first descends from heaven. One of the key stories Jesus references is when Abraham is about to sacrifice his son Isaac. And the other is when Daniel has a vision of the Son of Man. So why is he linking these two stories to what he's saying in John chapter 3? And what does this reveal about what he really means? If you want to understand John 3:16 on the deepest level possible and be permanently transformed by the love of God, you will want to see this. Let's jump into the most famous Bible verse, John chapter 3, verse 16. Guys, we're in John chapter 3. And what I want to do today is lay out the outline for where we are going, that God loves us. God sent his one and only Son that we would believe and not perish and have eternal life. And we're going to look at Daniel's prophecy. There's a reason, because Jesus will reference the Son of Man in verse 15 of chapter 3. We're going to look at Moses on Mount Sinai. We're going to look at Abraham on Mount Moriah in Genesis 22, where he's about to sacrifice Isaac in obedience to God. We're going to look at Ezekiel's vision very briefly. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring all of these different stories throughout the Old Testament together here in John chapter 3. Because what I believe Jesus is doing is he is actually bringing all these stories, unifying them in himself and what he's saying and doing. So if I don't understand what Abram did on Mount Moriah in Genesis 22, I'm going to miss a dimension of what Jesus is saying. If I don't understand Daniel's prophecy of the Son of Man approaching the Ancient of Days on the clouds with power and authority and dominion in a kingdom, I'm going to miss a dimension of what Jesus really means here. If I don't understand what Moses is doing when he comes down the mount from being up there 40 days and he comes down, the people of Israel are in a huge old idolatrous situation with the golden calf. If I don't understand how that connects to what's going on here, I'm going to miss a dimension of what Jesus is saying here. Same with Ezekiel's vision. So what I'm going to do is read John chapter 3 for you. And I know we already went through this section in depth. We talked about Passover. We talked about Pharaoh. We talked about the Red Sea. We talked about a few stories. The Bronze Serpent in Numbers. So we're going to connect all these stories together. As I was reading this, I thought, I can't just leave this where I left it. There's so much more that I didn't address that I must address what the Lord has shown me. So we're going to revisit a few verses in John 3, but we're really going to continue from where we left off as well. So reading John chapter 2, verse 23, as we enter into John 3, this is how John 2 ends. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs he was doing. Okay, so this is about seeing signs. But Jesus on his part did not entrust himself to them. Watch this, because he knew all people. He needed no one to bear witness about man. He knew himself what was in humanity, what was in man. So the last story, as we enter into John chapter 3, ended by telling us Jesus was in Jerusalem during the Passover feast. And the conversation with Nicodemus in chapter 3 is very likely happening during the time of Passover in that season. Okay, so the last two stories had incredibly significant connections to Passover because Passover seems to be the setting of what Jesus is doing here. And so when John ends chapter 2 by saying Jesus knew what was in man, I believe this is a reference to what's about to take place with Nicodemus. Jesus knows what's on the inside of mankind. That's why he's going to say we need to be reborn. We need a spiritual rebirth. Right? We need to become new creations because there's an issue with us internally. At the core of our nature and our essence, there's something wrong. We need to be reborn. It's called the spiritual rebirth by the Spirit. So entering into John chapter 3, it says, Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, and he was a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night. And he said to him, Rabbi, look, we know that you are a teacher come from God. No one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. Now there's been no public spectacle of any miraculous power so far. Jesus has not done any public signs yet, apart from In chapter 2, we see the wedding at Cana. And that was a very private sign where only the disciples and the servants got to know what Jesus really did behind the scenes. So Nicodemus, when he says, we know these signs that you're doing, no one can do them unless God is with him. I think he's referencing the temple cleansing that just took place in chapter 2. That's what prompted Nicodemus to have this conversation with Jesus in the first place. And so what we need to understand is that Passover is the setting. There's a reference to the fact that Jesus just cleansed the temple the first time. I do believe there's a second temple cleansing towards the end of the gospel in his ministry. And so the temple sacrifices, the temple system, and Passover are going to be a large part of this conversation. Okay, that's why we spent the time we did in the last episode addressing, if I lose my voice, I lose it, the fact that Passover and temple sacrifices are a huge part of what Nicodemus is understanding about Jesus. So verse 3, Jesus answered him, look, Nicodemus, buddy, truly I say to you, unless someone is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. You cannot. Let's just cut to the chase and no more beating around the bush. You can't see the true kingdom of God unless you're born again. Now Nicodemus says, how can a man be born when he is old? We addressed this in the last episode. Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? And Jesus answered, look, truly, truly I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he can't enter the kingdom of God. So this is not just about seeing it from a distance. This is about entering into it, Nicodemus. That's what it means to really see and behold and experience the kingdom, is that you enter into it as part of that kingdom. Because verse 6 will tell us, that which is born of the flesh is flesh. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Don't marvel that I said to you, you must be born again. Because the wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you don't know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. Now, real quick, we had a Bible study on Thursday, 2 Thursdays ago. And we went through John chapter 3, and someone brought up Genesis chapter 3, verse 8. And I just want to go there real fast. Because we, in the last episode, talked about how the Spirit of God is associated at times with wind, with water, with oil. And what we see here in this chapter is we see two of those images. We see wind and water associated with the working of the Spirit, or the presence of the Spirit. And in Genesis 3, verse 8, there's something for us to really think about. Because Jesus is going to reference the fact that no one comes to the light unless they... I'll say it like this. No one comes to the light if they love the darkness, because their works are evil and they love that and they don't want to be exposed. And I do believe we see that in Genesis 3 when Adam and Eve are hiding behind the trees and God comes, Adam, where are you? And they're hiding in shame. They don't want to come to the light because of the sin they've committed. Well, in the same chapter, we see the Lord God coming in the garden in the cool of the day. He's walking, and it says the cool of the day here. Another way you could legitimately translate that can refer to a wind. There's a wind that's present and associated with God walking. I wouldn't say it's a violent windstorm like we see with Job. It could be, and maybe that's why they're hiding. But no matter what, God is walking in the cool of the day, in the presence of Adam and Eve, walking in the garden. And with him comes a sense of like awesomeness. And that wind could be what's present. The man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees of the garden. So the cool here, that's why there's a footnote here that says Hebrew word for wind. You can translate it, when you hear cool of the day, you think, oh, it's just a really nice, brisk walk. But when you hear the wind of the day, you think there's a wind blowing, like we see at Pentecost. There's a sound of a violent wind associated with the Spirit of God coming upon the people. And I think that is to reference us to Genesis 3. The presence of God, there's a wind that comes with him, just like Job. When God finally comes and visits Job, I heard you've been talking a big game, buddy. Here I am. Let's talk. And so when we get to John chapter 3, and Jesus talks about the wind blows where it wishes and you hear its sound. I don't think he's just pulling that random image out of thin air for nothing. I do believe that's a common image for the Spirit of God, or associated with the presence of the Spirit as wind. Nicodemus said, how can these things be? And Jesus answered, are you the teacher of Israel, and yet you don't understand these things? It's funny how you could be steeped in religious, I'll say religion, man-made religion. You can be steeped in a pursuit of knowledge, a pursuit of information and data about God, and still not understand the real things that matter. Just for us to take inventory. Verse 10, Jesus answered, "Are you the teacher of Israel? You don't understand these things? Truly I say to you, we speak of what we know, and we bear witness to what we've seen, but you don't receive our testimony. If I've told you earthly things and you don't yet believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things?" Verse 13, "No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven. That is the Son of Man." And in the last episode in John's Gospel, I failed, as a teacher, to really pay attention to the fact that Jesus is not just making a passing statement about ascending and descending. I believe that is also referencing a specific story. Verse 14, "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness," now this is an obvious reference to the story in Numbers, where the people of Israel sin, and then God says, "Hey, Moses, make a bronze serpent, hang it on the wood, that have them look to it, that's what will heal them of the disease and the plague that the serpents are inflicting." That's obviously what Jesus is alluding to here. Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, so that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. And now with all of that background information, we get to the most famous verse in the entire world, John 3:16. You see it everywhere. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God didn't send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Listen, whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is already condemned because he's not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And look, this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and doesn't come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God." And all of this follows John 3:16. And we love John 3:16. It's powerful. It sums up the gospel in probably the most basic form possible. God's love, God giving, his son dying so that we don't perish, us having life. That sums up the beautiful good news of Jesus and the kingdom. And I love that, but we usually stop there, and we forget that 17 through 21 is part of what it means that God sent his Son into the world. It's that God doesn't want the world to perish. This is what Peter writes about. God does not, his will is not for people to perish. His will is not for any to perish, but for all to have life. God didn't send Jesus to condemn and point out our wrong and accuse. In fact, John 5, Jesus will say, look, you guys rely on Moses and the law and the commandments and Torah, and that's actually what exposes you. That's what will accuse you on the day of judgment. The very thing you're relying on is going to be the thing that exposes your real problem and should be pointing you to me, but you don't trust in me. So let's back it up. When we get to John 3:16, I know we have a lot of history with John 3:16. You probably have a lot of background information with John 3:16 and about John 3:16. But I want us to think, when Jesus says, God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. That phrase, only Son, right here, can be translated only begotten Son, and in some translations it is translated like that. And that is not to diminish or minimize the divinity of Jesus, but when it says only begotten, there is only one story in the entire Old Testament where we see that phrase, only Son, or another phrase, only begotten Son. There's only one story. And I don't believe it's accidental that Jesus happened to use that language, which is only seen in one story in the Old Testament, as well as in verse 13, he references ascending into heaven and descending from heaven. There's this conversation on going up, or rather coming down in order to go up to offer life, just like the bronze serpent. God used that to bring life. And Jesus is saying that that's exactly what the only Son from God has come to do. I first descended in order to ascend on your behalf so that you could have life in my name. That's what Jesus offers. So let me take you to the only place where we see this unique not just phrase, but where someone is truly the only begotten of someone or the only son of someone. And you can probably guess it's Genesis chapter 22. Genesis 22, right here. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to split the screen. On the left side, you see Genesis 22. On the right side, you see John 3. And I'm going to do my best to show you why I don't believe it's just that, oh, you said only son, and we only see that in Genesis 22. That's not the only way that these two stories connect. When you understand what Abram's doing and what's taking place and the setting and what God does through that, then we come back to John 3 and we go, God really, like we understand on a deeper level what it means that God so loved the world. Because that we can say that in such a nonchalant way where we truly don't think about the gravity of that statement. There is a loving God who pre-exists all things, who sustains all things, who brings everything into existence, who is outside time and space and is not material and is immaterial, and he's just pre-existent, all eternally existent. That God has chosen to love the world in such a profound way, an extreme way, that he sent his one and only son to do the unthinkable. And his son willingly lays down his life. When you understand what Abraham is doing in Genesis 22 and what God is demonstrating with Abraham's act of obedience, John 3:16 is taken to another level. So in Genesis 22 alone, just the story of Abraham, if you're not familiar with the story, God tells Abraham, sacrifice Isaac. He doesn't really intend for him to do it. But that's the story. He's going to have to go to a mountain to actually do the whole thing and build an altar. And then in the end, God's going to save Isaac and make sure Abraham doesn't do it and go through with it. And then God blesses Abraham for being willing to lay down the promise and the blessing. But in Genesis 22, you're going to see the word son 12 times in 8 verses. 12 times in 8 verses. That means more than every verse for 8 verses, or 18 verses rather. I take that back. In 18 verses, you're going to see the word son 12 times. You'll see the phrase only son 3 times in this story, which tells me this is not, we often make this about Abraham's act of obedience and faithfulness. And yes, absolutely. But we fail to miss the part the son plays, the role the son plays, which is not to overshadow the role of Abraham and his faithfulness as the father, but to say this story really wants you to continue to remember that this is about his one and only son. I'll show you. Genesis chapter 22, and then we're going to parallel this with John as much as we can. Genesis 22, after these things, God tested Abram. How does God test him? He says, Abraham, and Abraham says, here I am. Now that in itself is a profound statement, because within that seems to be this loaded idea of I'm available and willing as a servant to do whatever the master is calling me to do. Here I am, a willing, humble servant. Take your son, your only son. John 3:16, God gave his what? His only son. He's not one among many. He's not one, like God could just make another one. The Son is the eternal Word emanating from the Father at the right hand of the Father in eternity past, before everything existed. There's no such thing as making another. This is Jesus who is not created. He is uncreated. And then we get to Abraham, and this son, Isaac, is technically not Abraham's only son. Abraham has another son named Ishmael first, by Hagar. But the reason God refers to Isaac as Abraham's only son is because this is the only true heir of the estate, the true heir and promised offspring that God is going to work with. This is the only one that God brought by promise. This is the only one that is going to inherit everything Abraham leaves behind and continue his name and be the lineage or be the line through which the Messiah comes through. This is the only son. There is no other one. So, Abraham, take your only son, Isaac, the one whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains. Isaac, again, wasn't Abraham's only and first son, but as it relates to status and being the heir and the firstborn in that sense, Isaac is the only one. He's the only one that God has actually given as a promise. The second thing to note about Isaac is that Isaac technically wasn't Abraham's to give in the first place. And you go, what do you mean? Well, God is the one who gave Isaac to Abraham. So technically, he belonged to God, really. He came from God as a miracle baby. Isaac should not have existed. And when you look at all the natural order of things and where Sarah's dusty womb was at and how Abram was up there in years and was getting dusty, Isaac should not have existed. He's a miracle baby by promise. God gave him, so he belongs to God. Abraham is simply taking what God had given him and offering him back up to God, which is his son's life. When God gives his son, though, there's something different taking place. Abraham, of course, going, well, he's not mine to begin with, so God, you can have him back. He's yours. With Jesus, with the Father, it's very different. Jesus willingly lays down his life. It's almost like Jesus at times plays the role of both Abraham and Isaac throughout his ministry. And God is willingly giving what rightfully belongs to him for the life of the world. And that's very different. And then when we see that he's the only son, true heir, this is true of Jesus. He's the only true begotten son. And notice he says, your son whom you love, right here. You know, Isaac, the one that you love? Well, in John chapter 5, verse 20, this is what Jesus says about himself. The Father loves the Son and shows him all that he's actually doing, and greater works than these will he show him, so that you may marvel. So Jesus himself will refer to him as the one whom the Father loves. And so you see this beautiful relationship between the Father and his Son, not just with Abraham and Isaac, but even more so with God and his Son Jesus. There's this perfect love, perfect union, perfect harmony, perfect relationship. And Jesus willingly comes down into our world, and the Father willingly sends his Son. And in that sense, we see this image of Abraham and Isaac. And then he tells Abraham, go to this land of Moriah. And we don't know if Abraham has ever been here before, and it's just not recorded. But this is, as far as I remember, this is the first time we see Mount, or the land of Moriah in this story. And interestingly enough, just a little tidbit for you. Mount Moriah, where Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, or he's willing to sacrifice Isaac, that's where the temple is going to be built. And the reason that's significant is because right before Jesus has this conversation with Nicodemus, we see him doing what? We see him going into the temple and cleansing house, cleaning house. Because the temple has become what it has, well, it was never supposed to be. And then he uses the temple as a springboard to talk about himself and how he's going to resurrect from the dead, and the temple of his body will be destroyed, but the Father will raise him up. And there's something about all of that background information relates us back to Genesis chapter 22. And so here we have in verse 3, verse 2, God calls Abraham, offer him there as a burnt offering. And again, what Jesus just did in chapter 2 of John is he cleansed the temple of all the animals that would have been used for sacrifice and used for burnt offerings. And there's a mountain that Abraham is sent to, just as Jesus will say in John chapter 4 to the woman at the well, because she goes, well, what mountain are we supposed to worship at? Y'all say in Jerusalem, and I'm a Samaritan, so we have our place. So which mountain is it? And Jesus will say, look, it's neither going to be on this mountain or that mountain. There's no specific place. All who worship the Father are going to worship him in spirit and truth. It won't be about a specific mountain anymore. And here we have Abraham being sent to a specific mountain. Something to be thinking about. Verse 3, Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men. And I never really questioned why it is that Abraham chooses to take 2 young men. Why take any young men at all? Don't you trust God to take care of you, buddy? If God called you to go there, won't he sustain you? Won't he preserve you? Man, Abraham, why are you doubting? That's how I used to think. I think more of what's taking place. You could say, well, he's taking them for protection. He's taken them to carry his stuff and deal with all the belongings and think about all that went into sacrifice. And Abraham has the wood, and is he going to have to build an altar? Is he bringing the stuff? What's going on? He needs people possibly to carry the stuff. Maybe. But I'm going to put a pin there and say there are two young men going with Abraham and Isaac. And his son, Isaac. Again, we know who Isaac is, so it's like, why do we need to know, again, that it's his son? I'm making sure I'm tracking with my notes. So, they go, and he cut the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place which God had told him. So again, why the need for the two young men? Why are there two? I'll say it like this. Where else do we see two figures playing a sort of guardian role around sacred space on a mountain? And the answer is going to be, well, in the tabernacle, we see the two cherubim overlooking the Ark of the Covenant and the tablets of the testimony within the Ark. That's the sacred space of God that only the high priest goes in on the Day of Atonement. We'll see that same image in the Garden of Eden, that sacred mountain of God where God was with Adam and Eve. And we'll see the two cherubim again. Well, at least two, because there's multiple. So we're going to see the cherubim there guarding the way back into the tree of life in that sacred space. And I wonder if we're supposed to see what Abraham is doing as going into a place where he's going to meet with God, offer sacrifices, offer worship. In that sense, it's sacred space. And these two men are supposed to kind of be stand-ins for what we see as the cherubim in the temple, the tabernacle, and the Garden of Eden. Are they supposed to kind of be that? Or think of Jesus at his resurrection. There's one angel at his head and one angel sitting at his feet. And then you're supposed to think, whoa, is he supposed to? Yes, he is. So just be thinking about that. As the serpent was lifted up, right here in John chapter 3, Jesus references in Numbers, the bronze serpent lifted up on a piece of wood. Abraham here is carrying the wood for the burnt offering as well. In other words, the bronze serpent was hung on a piece of wood, and the people of Israel were supposed to look to that for healing because God provided that as the means for their healing. And in Genesis chapter 2, where Abraham is going to lay Isaac upon, is going to be on wood. And in that sense, it's going to foreshadow Jesus, who is hung on a piece of wood that we look to for salvation and righteousness and healing from his sacrifice. Verse 4, on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Now again, if we're thinking what Jesus has done so far in his ministry up to John chapter 3, he's cleansed the temple, and then he says to the religious leaders that are like, "Whoa, how dare you do this stuff? Who sent you?" He goes, well, you want a sign? In 3 days, destroy this temple, and then I'll raise it up. So he says, essentially, on the third day, I'll raise up the temple that y'all destroy. There's an image of man destroying what God has sent, but God works through that in the third day resurrection life, breaks forth from the grave for humanity through Jesus, who was hung on a cross. And here we have Abraham going on the third day, or rather on the third day he arrives, he sees this place that will be, he doesn't know yet, but blessing and promise is going to flow from this place, provision. He's going to look at this Mount Moriah after the fact and go, this is the place from which God provides. On the mountain of the Lord, God will provide. And so there's something about the third day to pay attention to as well. And then he lifted his eyes and saw the place from afar. Now, I want you to put a pin in that phrase, because we're going to see that same thing in Ezekiel, same thing in Daniel, same thing essentially, I believe, when Moses comes down and he lifts his eyes and he sees the golden calf. That just, for me, links all these stories together in another way beyond the ways that I'm just already connecting them. But Abraham lifts up his eyes and he sees this place. And what he sees, that he doesn't know yet, is the place that God is going to provide a ram on instead of Isaac. What he sees this place as being, as so far at this point in the story, he sees this mountain. This is the place where I got to give up what God promised. This is the place where this blessing and this promise comes to an end, because God has asked me, commanded me to give it up, to give him up. This is the place where things are going to die and he's unsure of how it's going to work out. This for Abraham, this place that he sees is different. He sees it differently than we see it in hindsight. He doesn't have all the information we do, but he sees it. And I want us to think about Israel was supposed to, this right before Jesus says God so loved the world in John 3, he says the serpent was lifted up. And I just wonder, well, what is it that the people had to do in order to be healed? They had to look to the bronze serpent to be saved. Abraham is lifting his eyes and looking to, seeing the place that he doesn't know yet. Provision is going to come from. God is going to provide a ram in place of Isaac. And this is going to be a huge milestone in Abraham's life. This is going to be a reference point, a landmark that Abraham will constantly reference, that the biblical authors will constantly reference. And then in John 6:40, to make this about Jesus, this is what he says. He says, this is the will of my Father, same gospel, that everyone who looks on the Son or looks to the Son, just like the bronze serpent, and believes in him should have eternal life. And I will raise him up on the last day. What it means to look to or to look on or to lift your eyes and set your gaze upon is essentially to find a sense of trust and faith in that thing that God has said to look to for what he's providing. And God is going to provide something marvelous from this on this mountain that Abraham does not yet know. He doesn't yet know what's going to happen. And it's wonderful. Then they get there. And Abraham says to his two young men, hey, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. Okay? So we think about this. Abraham, first of all, the way Abraham views sacrifice is worship. In other words, the way that he views giving up his son, he sees it as worshiping God. You and I live in a culture where it's like singing is worship. That's a form of worship. That's an expression of worship. That's a way to worship. That's not the only way to worship, though. We need to view worship as giving up something that is of value unto God that rightfully belongs to him. Whether it's my praise, whether it's my time, whether it's my gifts, whether it's, and I say my, but it's really his. I'm borrowing these things. And coincidentally, right before Jesus talks about this, God so loved the world, he gave his son. He ain't asking y'all to give stuff. Is we have Jesus cleansing the temple where the sacrifices and the worship take place. And then he says, I will raise up. And I love this. Abraham says, and we will come again to you. And you and I go, what did Abraham think was going to happen? God said, hey, give me your son. Lay him down as an offering and sacrifice him to me on Mount Moriah. And Abraham's telling his two young men, hey, we'll come again to you. Is he lying to cover it? Is he just like, I cannot tell Isaac what is it? We'll come back. Don't worry, guys. We are totally coming back together. Nothing's going to happen. Is he just covering his butt so Isaac doesn't really figure out what's happening? Or does he really believe that? Well, Hebrews 11 verse 19 tells us that Abraham considered God was able even to raise him from the dead. Even though he told Abraham, hey, give me Isaac. Abraham goes, I know God is able to raise Isaac from the dead. From which, figuratively speaking, Abraham actually did receive Isaac back from the dead. Like if we're talking in a figurative sense, he pretty much had already laid him down, was about to kill him. He came back and Abraham went, I don't have to kill you? Like, you're not dead? I get to have a living son? And in that sense, he did come back to life. And right before Jesus says that God sent his one and only son, we see him cleansing the temple, the place where sacrifices and worship take place. But it's come to the point where the worship, the offerings, the sacrificial system, it's become corrupt. It's become really tainted. And Jesus has come to address that. And instead of this pure, unadulterated, God, we love you worship, giving up what is of value with a sense of reverence and honor and fear of you, it's become something else. And Jesus has come to address that. And that's why he says, destroy my body in 3 days, right here. Destroy this temple in 3 days, I will raise it up. He's talking about the resurrection, which again is what we see in Isaac. The only son is laid down. He's given back to the Father. God provides, but instead with Jesus, he is the provision of God. There's nothing that can take his place. Nothing else can take the place of Jesus. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on Isaac, his son, which you and I are supposed to think, oh, like Jesus carrying our cross. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. And again, if I'm supposed to see this as a place where worship is taking place, where man is interacting with God and God meets humanity, it's sacred space, and I'm supposed to think, that sounds like the Garden of Eden. That sounds like the tabernacle and temple where there's the cherubim overlooking the Ark of the Covenant. And in the Garden of Eden, the two cherubim are guarding the way back into the tree of life. And we have a similar setting here with Abraham. Then I see fire and the knife as well. Where else do we see fire and a sharp object or weapon? On a sacred mountain with two figures guarding the way in. And it's the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is the place where you see fire and a flaming sword just spinning about. But here it's Abraham about to sacrifice his son rather than God guarding the way in so no one goes back to the tree of life. This becomes an image of the way that God is going to bring us back into the garden through his son. And Abraham about to sacrifice his son becomes an image of Jesus, foreshadowing that. And Isaac said to his father, should I say it? Dad, here I am, son. Behold, the fire, the wood. Hey, where's the lamb? For the burnt offering. And Abraham said, in a very cryptic way, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. That probably made Isaac feel a little more uneasy. That didn't answer my question, really. I asked where the lamb is, and you just said God will provide. Okay, let's just keep going. You know what's beautiful about this story, guys, is that this is the lamb God provides. Essentially, Isaac won't have to die, and God provides a ram that's caught in the bushes. In John 1:36, same gospel. I'll just take you there fast. John 1:36, if it searches. John the Baptist will say, behold, the Lamb of God. That's how he views Jesus. I wonder if John the Baptist also saw Jesus in connection to the Mount Moriah story where Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac. Because he is the true Lamb of God that Isaac couldn't be, no one can be, and no animal could be. And so instead of God sparing the son like he did with Isaac and giving a replacement, Jesus comes to replace us and stand in our place. Like, you understand that we are the one in the 99 sheep story where the shepherd chases the one and leaves we are the one that was lost. We are the prodigal that left and God brings us home. We are the one that God sent his son to stand in our place for in order to bring us back to him. Like, we are the lost. In this story, there's a sense in which, yes, Isaac foreshadows Jesus, but in another sense, Isaac also seems to be a stand-in for all of humanity, where God goes, whoop, y'all, you don't have to die. I've provided a lamb for myself that none of y'all could ever be, that none of you could ever bring me. And this just brings us back to the whole temple sacrificial system that Jesus comes to address, and it's become so corrupt, and he's dealing with the cleansing and going, what have we become? And this is not the time, and this is not the way to do it. And he's also going, look, God sent his one and only son, and Nicodemus probably went, there's only one place in the Old Testament where that phrase is used over and over, at least Genesis 22. Abraham's about to sacrifice his son. God sends his son. God provides for himself. Abraham was right. Isaac goes, where's the lamb? And Abraham goes, God will provide for himself. This has never been about what you could bring God to stand in for yourself, to take your own death, to deal with your own depravity. This has never been about all the good works you can bring God to offset the wrong you've done. This has always been about what God can provide for you in your place. God doesn't ask us to bring him any kind of sacrifice on some holy, sacred mountain of worship as if we can offer him what can make us new and restore right relationship and make us born again. He provides the means for that. Our job is to look to the mountain like Abraham. Our job is to look to the bronze serpent like the people in Israel. Our job is to look to Jesus and trust. You know what we bring is faith in God's provision. That's what we bring to the table. And it's not even to our credit. People get very frustrated with the idea that we bring faith. Yes, faith originates in God in some sense. Yes, faith is only possible. I said yes, like Mike Tyson. Yes, faith is only possible because God has made it possible. Yes, God has made our faith result in what it does because he's provided all the stuff. But we still believe, and we don't get credit in the sense that God's like, that's impressive, let me reward you. He just says, you want what my son has made available? You trust in him. He provides it. We benefit from what he's freely given. And God has known from the very beginning, guys, that we cannot provide what we truly need. We cannot provide and give what he truly deserves and what can make us new and bring us back into the garden. That is Jesus alone. He offers himself in our place. We're the ones that should be laid on the altar, about to be killed because sin results in death. And yet Jesus goes, hey, you, step off. I'll take your place. Instead of you being separated from the Father, instead of you going into the grave and staying there, instead of you being dead in your sin and having no hope and way out, I'll take your sin upon myself. I'll die your death. I'll go into the grave. I'll deal with the law that you never could. I'll live the perfect life you never could. And Jesus is the stand-in for all of humanity. He literally has paid for the sins of the whole world. That doesn't mean the whole world will benefit. That means it's available to the whole world. And not everyone will believe because that's too easy. That shatters human pride. That shatters all the arrogance that we think all the credentials and the resume that we bring to God. It just obliterates all of that because God is asking you to just trust in his provision. And that's essentially what Abraham had to do from the beginning, is trust in God's provision. God will provide. If it's you, Isaac, it's you. He's provided. He gave you. You're the promise. I'm laying you down because he gave you to begin with. You belong to him. So God has provided. I don't know what Abraham was thinking. No idea. But when they come to the place of which God told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. They come to the place. And you know what they do? They go up the mountain. And you know what Isaac does? He's wondering, where's the lamb? So Abraham and Isaac, they ascend a mountain to worship and sacrifice. The problem is, no one can ascend the true spiritual heavenly mountain of God to offer true spiritual worship that God accepts enough to make us new. We can't ascend. Only Jesus can do this on our behalf because he comes down. And this is exactly why he says right here, as Moses, no one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven. That is the Son of Man. Abraham and Isaac ascending the mountain ain't going to cut it. They can't offer what all of humanity can benefit from. It barely was enough for Abraham to get the blessing and the promise. They can't extend that to all of humanity. But the beautiful part about this is God is going to bring the nations and the Gentiles into the picture through what he does. And this is exactly what Jesus says in John 4. Look, there's no mountain, woman. The time is coming where all who worship the Father, he's looking for people who worship him in spirit and truth. That's what God wants. And too many of us are too busy bringing God what we think he wants. And we're not even asking what he truly wants. We're trying to like offset all of our bad with enough good, thinking if I lay enough money down, if I make a big enough sacrifice in faith, if I leave everything behind and become a missionary, then finally all of my bad will no longer plague my conscience, and I can offset and balance all of that out, and I can be good. And God is going, you cannot give me what can atone for your sin. You can't. The whole point of John is trust, believe, look to, rely on the Son. The problem is that's too easy, and we don't play a role in that the way we want, and we don't get the credit, and we don't really get to do something to feel a sense of pride and investment. So we go, let's try another way. Let's keep bringing God works and efforts and obedience and religion and knowledge and zeal that he frankly doesn't accept because it's outside of his Son, and it can never actually do what we hope it does. Restore us back to the Father. The true sacrifice God is looking for requires someone to come down from heaven first in humiliation, to lay down their life, go into the grave, give themselves up in order to rise from that place, having come down from preeminence and superiority and glory and eternity. Someone needs to do that in order for us to go up to the Father. And this is why Jesus is the only one who could ever bring you back to the right relationship with God that we lost. So Genesis 22:10 says, then Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife to slaughter his son, and he's about to kill. And there have been other views about it, what Abraham's doing here, okay? Where it's like Abraham wasn't supposed to do this. Abraham is treating the God of Israel like a pagan god because the pagan gods demanded the sacrifice of their children. Child sacrifice was the way that you would please the gods. And now Abraham's thinking God is another pagan. I've heard that view, and I understand the sentiment. I understand that. Is Abraham supposed to do this, or is he supposed to push back? Is God inviting Abraham to go, God, this doesn't sound like you? Either way, Abraham goes through with it. That's what we do know, is that Abraham goes through with it, and God goes, because you didn't spare your son, here's some blessing. But Abraham here, I wonder if there's a sense in which what Abraham is about to do is an image of human effort, which you put a knife in a human's hand, you're likely going to see them murder someone. Go back to Cain. Go back to Genesis 3 when they reach for the fruit. It's disobedience and rebellion. And I don't know, I'm just thinking about this real time. I wonder if Abraham, about to kill his son, if we freeze frame that and we were to put it on a poster, if that is an image of what human beings think God wants. If that's all humanity can do on their own, is just continue needlessly slaughtering and killing. Maybe this is what the gods want. Maybe and just murder plagues the world. Like Genesis 6. Violence had grown in the land so much that God goes, we need to cleanse. That's what I see in Abraham about to, not to say Abraham is bad, and what I'm saying, the freeze frame of that is like, whoa, that's what humanity thinks God wants. That's what humanity on its own, without God intervening, that's all that humanity inevitably descends into, is needless violence and continuing. Is this what God, bloodshed? And then Jesus comes and he says this in chapter 3, verse 17, same chapter. God didn't send his son into the world to condemn. Like humanity is all about condemning and killing and murdering and taking sides and dividing and conquering and pillaging and bloodshed. And God, you got to punish that. You got to deal with that. Bring your wrath. And Jesus steps in verse 17 and goes, God didn't send his son into the world to condemn, but to save. Like God didn't send his son holding the knife. He actually sent his son to come under the knife, so that we could come out from under the knife ourselves through his sacrifice. That's the image I get. Again, not to make any statement about Abraham's failing here or he's a bad guy. I'm saying this becomes an image of humanity on its own is just slaughtering, bloodshed, violence. This is the sacrifice the gods want. And so God comes in and he does the opposite of what we think God would do. He's here to condemn and destroy and punish and wrath and vengeance. And he goes, no. I'm actually here to get on the altar and be the sacrifice that no one could ever be and none of y'all could ever bring. It's incredible. Jesus allows himself to be killed in our place instead of holding the knife over us to condemn us rightfully. Instead of summoning legions of angels while he's hanging there on the cross, he stays there till it's finished, humbly descending from heaven to do that, leaving glory. Watching the people whom he made, whom he's probably sustaining. Their life force depends on him as the eternal word. He brought them into existence, and the life that they have been given, they choose to use to kill him, and he lets it happen. Genesis 22:12, he said, don't lay your hand on the boy. Verse 11. The angel of the Lord calls to him from heaven and says, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. I wonder what that would have felt like. He said, don't lay your hand on the boy. Don't do anything to him, for now I know you fear God. Seeing as how you haven't withheld your son, there it is again, your only son from me. The story wants to emphasize over and over, this was Abraham's only son of promise. The angel calling from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. We'll see that in John 12:28. But it's not an angel, it's actually God calling. If I can pull up John 12:28. Right here. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. That same idea. The angel of God cries out to Abraham. And in the other gospel accounts, we see God calling out from the heavens to affirm his son at his baptism or at the Mount of Transfiguration or at the resurrection. He's affirming his son. And God goes, because you have not withheld your son. In other words, what I see here, and I'm going to bring Romans 8 into this, is I see a man who is willing to dedicate or offer up whatever it takes, rather than withholding in fear of lack, fear of missing out, fear of losing something. Rather than disobeying, he willingly offers up and dedicates his son. This is the same willingness and obedience we see in Jesus laying down his life in John 10, where he says, I'm the good shepherd, and I've come to lay down my life for the sheep. No one takes it from me. Trust me. None of y'all can take my life unless I'm willingly laying it down. And he says, I'm going to take it up again. This is the same wrestling we see in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is going, Father, if there is any other way for this to pass, cool, but your will be done above mine. That's the submission and the surrender and the yielding that we see demonstrated in Abraham. Maybe not to that degree at all, because it's not Abraham giving up his life. He's like, my son's life. But that's the promise. That's his future. That's the blessing. That's the seed that God promised. You end that, Abraham's probably going, then none of the promises of God come true. And what's fascinating is that the son of promise here, Isaac, is foreshadowing Jesus, the true son of promise, who actually makes all of these promises come to life. Like, you understand, without Jesus, none of the promises given to the patriarchs actually come to fulfillment. They don't happen. Not in the way God truly guaranteed they would, in the fullness of the sense that he gave them. They don't happen without Jesus coming and submitting himself to the will of the Father. And this is what Romans 8:32 says. He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? What's the idea there? Abraham was willing to give up his son. He did not spare his son. And then you have God on another level, not sparing his divine eternal son, but willingly giving him up. And Jesus willingly partners with the Father to give up his own life. And you see salvation. Now in verse 13, Abraham lifts up his eyes and looks, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. Abraham went, took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. In other words, Abraham gets his son back because something else took his place. Not so with Jesus. There is nothing that could take the place of Jesus. Nothing. Once again, we see Abraham lifting up his eyes to recognize and see the provision of God. That's the same language we saw when he saw the mountain. He lifted up his eyes and he saw the mountain, and on this mountain, God is going to provide a ram to take the place of the promised son. Instead of his son being offered up, there's a ram. With the bronze serpent in Numbers, instead of the people being destroyed, we see the bronze serpent provided. With Jesus, instead of us being condemned, instead of us being separated from the Father, we see Jesus provided as the one who takes our place and brings us back to the Father. And this right here, instead of his son, right here in John 3:16, God so loved the world, he gave his only son, so that whoever believes in him shouldn't perish, but have eternal life. There is a great exchange taking place with Abraham's son and the ram. So instead of Isaac, the ram is provided and offered, and with Jesus, we are given life because of the great exchange that he has made. He takes our death to give us his life. He takes our place, he takes our sin, and he gives us his right relationship with the Father. He gives us life in his name. All of this right here in Genesis 22. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. On one mountain, God provides the ram for Abraham instead of Isaac. On another mountain, that being Mount Zion, Jerusalem, God provides his son who lays down his life for all of humanity instead of us. On this Mount Moriah, Abraham is laying down his son, where we'll actually see the temple get built later on. But with Jesus, he's going to be crucified and laid down outside of Jerusalem, outside of Mount Zion, outside of the temple, where he'll lay down his life on the cross. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven. And I wondered why, the angel of the Lord took a break and didn't, talk to Abraham. What's interesting to me is, I'm just going to pause and say this. I'm not making a statement about this observation. I'm just saying it's an observation. Abraham sees a ram, and he offers it up instead of his son. And I'm just saying the text never says God told him to offer up the ram. He just knew intuitively to do that. I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm just saying the text never has God saying, Abraham, sacrifice the ram. Now you go, well, that's implied if it's right there and he's provided and he just said, don't kill your son. Maybe. But I'm just saying he didn't ask Abraham to offer it. He did it anyway. And I don't know what to make of that. Real quick, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and I have some free gifts for you at abovereproachministry.com. Go to the website or click the links in the description below to check out all of our free Bible study resources. We have online Bible classes, devotional studies, Bible study workshops, all of my sermon notes, and more. You can even join our online church community on the Discord app. We also have discussion groups all around the world, and if you don't see one in your area, message me and we'll help you start a launch group. I personally lead a group in Spartanburg, South Carolina. If you live in the area, we'd love to have you join us on Fridays for Bible study. So contact me if you're interested, and if you or your church would like me to come preach or teach, just message me or shoot me an email and we'll see what we can do, because I love preaching in person. If you're a new follower of Jesus, click the New Believer section to access everything we recommend for new believers. And be sure to snag a copy of my book, Fruitful, to support this ministry. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's jump back into the video. So the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you've done this and you've not withheld your son, your only son, again, I will surely bless you and multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. Your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you've obeyed my voice. God gives Abraham a promise, blessing of descendants, and a promise that he would be a blessing to the nations because Abraham obeyed. And ultimately, this promise will be realized only because of Jesus' obedience to the Father. And this is exactly what Jesus is referencing here in John chapter 3. Because of his faithful obedience, we can become children of God. Now, we just read this and we go, the offspring, blessing the nations, possessing the gate of his enemies. All of that language seems to be like loaded into what Jesus is saying. You need to, if you want to enter the kingdom or see the kingdom, you need to be born again. That's why John 1:12 says, all who received him, he gave the right to become children of God. Because of his faithful obedience, his reward is that we get to become descendants of Abraham through faith, those of us Gentiles. And Jesus becomes the true blessing to the nations. Now, that took a lot longer than I wanted it to take, to be honest. I did not want it taking that long. I'm going to focus here on verse 13, that no one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And somehow that links us right into the Bronze Serpent story, Passover being the setting, and then the story of Mount Moriah, where Abraham's about to sacrifice Isaac. When Jesus says this, no one has ascended into heaven except he who first descended from heaven, that's the Son of Man. We often focus on the ascending part, the resurrection, glorification, going to the right hand of the Father, but we don't even focus on the descending part. That's actually what makes the ascending even possible, is that he first came down in order to go up for us. And the specific statement Jesus is making here has an order to it. It's not just a person going up, it's a person coming down first in order to go up. Otherwise we can say, well, Enoch was taken, or Elijah was taken in a chariots of fire, so he technically went up. So maybe Jesus is talking about him. But technically they didn't descend first, right, from heaven, the way Jesus does. Jesus is the only one who fits this criteria because he alone has come from heaven in order to go up for us. So the descending part matters. Being sent from God, sent from heaven matters. And what you're going to see is that this descending, coming from heaven, is associated with verse 11, if I can talk. Truly, truly, we speak of what we know and we bear witness to what we've seen, but you don't receive our testimony. So this sent one, Jesus, has a testimony. He's bearing witness to something, and the people of the world don't receive his testimony, even though he's sent from the Father. And apparently, being the Son of Man, he could have referred to himself as anything. Now, this is the most common title Jesus will use for himself in the third person, the Son of Man. And there's a reason I believe he uses it right here. Technically, in the prophet Ezekiel, you're going to see the Son of Man phrase 93 times. It is used most frequently in the prophet Ezekiel, 93 times. What I would like to do now is show you why Ezekiel chapter 2 is a great parallel to what's going on here. Now again, Jesus chooses to say, based on the ascending and descending and the serpent being lifted up, the Son of Man fits into all of that. And 93 times Ezekiel is referred to as the Son of Man. And when you see Ezekiel referred to as the Son of Man by God, most often it notes Ezekiel receiving the word of the Lord, to do the word of the Lord, and to proclaim and testify to the word of the Lord. And specifically, it notes Ezekiel being sent to a rebellious house that will not receive his testimony, just like Jesus says here in John chapter 3. So this section right here, Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 1 through 8, this will not be long. Ezekiel says, "And the Lord said to me, Son of man," which literally just means human one, "stand on your feet, and I will speak with you." And he spoke to me. The Spirit entered into me and set me on my feet. And I heard him speaking to me, and he said, "Son of man, I send you to the people of Israel, to nations of rebels who have rebelled against me." Right? Remember Jesus descending, coming, being sent to people who will not receive his testimony. He's filled with the Spirit, sent with a message from God. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. The descendants also are impudent and stubborn, and I send you to them, and you shall say, "Thus says the Lord God." And whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house, they will know a prophet has been among them. Now what did Nicodemus tell Jesus? Listen, we know that the signs you do, no one can do that unless he comes from God, right? So God is clearly with you. You got to be a prophet. And you, son of man, Ezekiel, don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid of their words. Though briars and thorns are with you, and you sit on scorpions, do not be afraid of them. Speak the words I say, for they are a rebellious house. What is Jesus sent to? A rebellious house. Now what I'd like to do is show you Daniel's prophecy. Daniel chapter 7 and 8. This is where things for me, my studies blew up in a good way. I was like, are you serious? This is ridiculous, man. Okay, Daniel is the only other place where the Son of Man phrase is used 2 times. Son of Man. Usually when you hear Son of Man, a lot of people who are familiar with the Old Testament will think Daniel's vision of the Son of Man ascending to the Ancient of Days on a cloud, approaching the Ancient of Days on a cloud. And I just want to show you Daniel's vision. And what I would like to do is think about what we just saw in Ezekiel. Think about what we read with Abraham ascending the mount, about to sacrifice Isaac, and all that transpired in that setting. And also think about what Jesus is saying in John 3. Let's do our best to think about any ideas that overlap all these stories. Okay, what do all of these stories have in common? What you're going to see, and then we'll look at Exodus 32, is that there's a lot they have in common. And I've already highlighted it for you to note. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring the great sea. I just want to think, well, what I love about John 3 is the water and wind imagery of the Spirit. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off. That's going to be Babylon. And it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. Right? That's going to be King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. And behold, and after this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard. So the bear is the kingdom that comes after Babylon, which is going to be the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire. After this I looked, and behold, another. I saw a leopard, right? And this is going to be the kingdom of Greece with Alexander the Great. 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast. That's going to be the Empire of Rome under Julius Caesar. Terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth that devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in its horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Right? So these are the 4 kingdoms of the earth, the major kingdoms that arise during biblical times. And what you're going to see is the Son of Man phrase, title, is used 2 times in Daniel, and they're right here in chapter 7 and chapter 8. Those are the only 2 times you'll see the Son of Man title used. And Daniel goes, as I looked, thrones were placed. The Ancient of Days took his seat. Let's imagine this as best as we can. His clothing was white as snow. The hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. The mobile throne that Ezekiel sees in his visions. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him, and 1,000 served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment. I'm marking this because I want you to remember this vision involves judgment on the nations. And the books were opened. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed. Its body was destroyed and given over to be burned with fire, and as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away. Their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. This is the rise and fall of empires. I saw in the night vision, and behold, watch, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. He's like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days. This is, remember, God judging the nations and the empires that are falling, rising and falling, and God executing fair and righteous judgment upon the human empires. And then you have the Son of Man approaching the Ancient of Days on the clouds. And he's presented before him. And to this Son of Man, who is like a Son of Man, he was given dominion, glory, a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away. His kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. So, just like the promise given to Abraham on Mount Moriah, that nations will be blessed through this offspring, that kingdoms would come, all that stuff, that the gates of their enemies would not prevail. Well, we see the same thing with the Son of Man here ascending and approaching the Ancient of Days. In other words, all the authority, all the power, all the dominion that came from all these human kingdoms collectively, that's bottled up and handed to this Son of Man. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious. The visions of my head alarmed me, and I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings, right? But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom. What is Jesus talking about in John chapter 3? You cannot see the kingdom. You cannot enter the kingdom unless you're born again. So the saints of the Most High here are receiving the kingdom. They're possessing the kingdom forever. And then Daniel says, I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast. It was very different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth and of iron and claws of bronze, in which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up. In other words, Daniel's going, I really don't understand. And as I looked, his horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, break it into pieces. As for the 10 horns out of this kingdom, 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He'll be different from the former ones. He'll put down 3 kings. He will speak words against the Most High and wear them out. The saints of the Most High, and they'll think to change the times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court that shall sit in judgment, and his dominion, the court shall sit in judgment. His dominion shall be taken away to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdoms and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. Notice the exchange that's taking place. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey this Son of Man. Now here's the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts alarmed me, but I kept the matter in my heart. Now watch, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after what appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, I was in Susa the citadel, in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision, I was at the Ulai Canal. Just like Ezekiel receives his vision, they're both at canals, both receive visions, both are in Babylonian captivity in the territory of the Chaldeans. He raised his eyes, and what does he see? Well, he sees a ram. All I'm saying is I went to Genesis 22 and said, I remember someone else who opened his eyes in pagan territory and saw a ram with 2 horns. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other. The higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward, northward. No beast could stand before him. He did as he pleased and became great. This is another vision of nations ascending to power, and then another nation taking over. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth, without even touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank, and he ran at him in powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. The ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. And this is Alexander the Great's empire being split among his 4 generals. Out of one of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land, that's Israel. It grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the stars it threw down. Right? What was Abraham promised? That his descendants would be as numerous as the stars of heaven. So the stars here in heaven being cast down or trampled are the people of Israel, the saints of God. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. What do we see Abraham in Genesis 22 offering? Well, he was going to offer a burnt offering. What do we see Jesus messing with in John chapter 2 before he talks to Nicodemus? He's messing with the temple system and the burnt offerings and the animals because of the way they're doing it. It's corrupt. Temple system has become tainted. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offerings because of transgressions, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. This is Antiochus IV. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, that the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot? And he said, 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. In other words, Daniel doesn't understand. What does Jesus tell Nicodemus right here? Are you the teacher of Israel, and you don't understand these things? And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened, and I fell on my face. But he said, understand, O son of man. There it is again. There's the second time we're going to see this phrase. That the vision is for the time of end. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up, right, just like Ezekiel. And he said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation. It refers to the appointed times of the end. The ram you saw, kings of Media and Persia. The goat, the king of Greece. Right? So essentially you're going to have this prophecy about the king of Greece. Antiochus is going to do some messed up things with the temple, sacrifice pigs in the sacred space, command that no more following Jewish law. He essentially is the Hitler of his day. And he's going to just essentially mess with the temple, sacrificial system, Jewish people, persecute, kill them. Something like 40,000 died in a few days under his hand. Daniel becomes sick after he sees the vision. He doesn't understand it, okay? You're probably wondering why I read 2 chapters of Daniel and just gave you some history. Because of the fact that Jesus references the ascending and descending, referencing the Son of Man within that context, okay? And if you notice, there's a lot of kingdoms. There's a lot of exchanges. There's a lot of kingdoms rising to power and then being overthrown. There's God judging. There's the Son of Man, the true Son of Man, approaching the Ancient of Days to receive all the power and authority and dominion, which is essentially what Jesus is referencing in John 2 when he talks about resurrecting and ascending to the Father. So all these ideas are coming together. The last story I want to show you, and then I promise I'll bring this together. I know you're wondering, why are we reading so many Old Testament passages? Golden calf story, then we're done. Then I promise we'll bring this all together. Maybe just to do a little pause for you. What we have seen in Daniel's visions, what we saw in Ezekiel's vision, what we saw in Genesis 22, or rather take Ezekiel out of it. What we saw in Daniel's vision, Genesis 22 and John 3, and what we're going to see here in Exodus 32 is in all of these stories, the ascending, the descending, the Son of Man stuff, you're going to see a lot of similar things. Number one, you're going to see sacred space, whether that be a temple, tabernacle, the people of God, Mount Moriah. In John 3, Jesus, being the sacred space of God, heaven and earth intersecting through him, or him cleansing the temple. you're going to see sacred space. You're going to see some kind of sacrifices being made. In Daniel's visions, in Genesis 22, in John 3, Jesus went in and dealt with the sacrifices. Here in Exodus 32, they're sacrificing to the golden calf. In fact, rather than reading Genesis 32, I'll just kind of reference Exodus 32 as I make these statements. In all these stories, you're going to see the people of God inheriting or receiving a kingdom or land or promise or descendants. In Genesis 22, Abraham receives the promise about his descendants. In Daniel 7 through 8, the saints of God receive the kingdom. Exodus 32, they're receiving the Levites, at least, who are said to be standing apart from them as they're worshiping the golden calf. The reason I reference Moses is because Jesus talks about ascending and descending. And this is, as far as I can remember, the only place where someone descends in order to ascend the mount again on behalf of the people. This is the only place. And it's to deal with some kind of sin. Moses comes down from the mountain after being with God and sees this ridiculousness, goes back up the mountain to try and atone for them and mediate, and God goes, look, people are going to die for their sin. And so you have all this pagan sacrifice to the golden calf at the base of the mountain. God's wrath burns against them. Then God tells Moses, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. Okay. Moses goes, actually, remember the promise you made to the patriarchs? Don't kill them, because then the Egyptians will be like, hey, God brought the Israelites out here to this mountain just to kill them. Please turn from your burning wrath. And then Moses goes, remember Abraham, you told him that you'll multiply his offspring as the stars of heaven, that his people would inherit, the land forever. The Lord relents. Moses comes down, or turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets. He sees this madness and breaks the tablets, right? Essentially the covenant there, symbolically. He makes them drink after grinding the golden calf into powder, burning it with fire. He makes them drink it, which is symbolic of the wrath of God that they're drinking upon themselves. People of Israel, a bunch of them get killed by the Levites. And this is what Moses tells the Levites. You've been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son, and each one at the cost of his brother, and God bestows a blessing upon you this day. That sounds a lot like Genesis 22, I'm telling you. And then Moses goes up to the mountain and goes, hey, let me see if I can atone for your sin. They're sitting down there, and God goes, look, I've spoken to you. My angel shall go before you. I will visit their sin upon them, and the Lord brought a plague upon the people. So if we even bring in the Bronze Serpent story, the idea of God dealing with sin, and there's something to look to, and there's a Bronze Serpent, and there's a plague that breaks out. In Genesis 22, Daniel's vision, John 3, Exodus 32 here, all these stories, you'll see sacred space, a temple, sacrifices being made, the people of God receiving, inheriting something. The Levites here receive their station, and Abraham here is referenced as receiving the promised descendants. You'll see God judging. You'll see some kind of problem that God deals with, some kind of dealing with sin. There's some kind of spiritual messenger or voice from heaven. Daniel, it was the angel. Exodus 32, Moses comes down with a message, but also God speaks to Moses. And then he references the angel of the Lord. In Genesis 22, an angel of the Lord speaks from heaven. The angel of the Lord says, Abraham, Abraham, don't kill your son. In each of these passages, you'll see kingdoms and nations of mankind. Someone ascending, whether that be spiritually, physically, literally, to power, up a mountain. Kings and rulers are referenced. And then the mention of the stars and the heavens in all these passages refer to the people of God. The stars in the heavens are referring to or stand in for the people of God. And then you'll see a kind of literal or spiritual mountain. Whether in Genesis 2 it's Mount Moriah, or whether it's Jerusalem in John chapter 2 and 3, whether it's in Daniel's vision, the Son of Man ascending to the Ancient of Days and the heavenly, spiritual, divine mountain of God, or whether it's here, Mount Sinai. All these stories collide for me because of the fact that Jesus is essentially saying, hey, Moses couldn't do it, Abraham couldn't do it, Daniel saw it, Ezekiel saw some glimpses of that. I'm here to be everything that no one could ever be. What Daniel saw, what Moses tried to do, what the bronze serpent symbolized, I've come to essentially, remember Daniel's vision, the kingdoms of man being handed over to the Son of Man, and then the saints inherit the kingdom? Jesus is saying, I have come to bring that. But the way that I ascend and approach the Ancient of Days is by being lifted up like the bronze serpent. And then you have to look to me the way Abraham was provided for on the mountain. I'm the provision of God. I've come to deal with sin. I've come to be hung on the cross. The way Isaac carried the wood up the mountain. I'm ascending the greater mountain because I've come down. Moses couldn't do it. He couldn't atone for it. He couldn't mediate. Daniel and all his visions, he couldn't understand it. You go to... Abraham, he couldn't offer something. Jesus is saying everything you see in the Old Testament. The gospel message is that God so loved the world. He's the one sending his Son. He's the one fulfilling the vision of Daniel by sending his Son to be the one who approaches the Ancient of Days with the sacrifice we couldn't bring. He's the one bringing life through his Son. Isaac couldn't do it. Abraham couldn't do it. No patriarch, no prophet, no one in all human history could ever do it. Jesus does. And so there's judgment. Verse 17, God didn't send his Son into the world to condemn the world. You see God crushing the nations. You see God bringing judgment. In Exodus 32, you see God, essentially, some people read Genesis 22, and I like to think that maybe I could entertain the idea that the whole reason Abraham is even in the situation where he's called to sacrifice his son is because of what he did to Hagar. That might be linked to it, but the idea here is God is sending his Son to deal with all the problems, all the sin, all that human kingdoms couldn't deal with, all that human rulers couldn't deal with, all that prophets and wise men and patriarchs couldn't deal with. Jesus is coming to deal with it, and he's not coming to condemn. He's coming to save. This is not about God crushing and annihilating the world and starting over like with Moses, right? He's like, I'll start over with you, Moses. And Moses is like, I don't think that's supposed to happen. You told Abraham, and God's going, it's my boy. God ain't starting over. He's bringing, by crushing and annihilating, God's starting over, bringing something new by bringing about a new people through his Son. And so we are the people of God that are essentially, along with Jesus, we are inwardly, spiritually, the first of new creation to come. And I think the creation language is so important to recognize because John 1 opens by saying, like, essentially God is bringing new creation through his Son. He's the light. He's the Word. Verse 18, whoever believes in Jesus is not condemned, but whoever does not is already condemned. That's what Jesus tells them. Moses accuses you. The law accuses you. You're under a law you cannot fulfill. To try and meet the law that inevitably will expose your inability is to run on a hamster wheel the rest of your life. You're under condemnation. To come under that is to believe in the name of the only Son of God. And John 1:12 tells us, to all who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So you want to inherit the kingdom Daniel saw? You want to be a part of the lineage of Abraham? God promised Abraham on Mount Moriah, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars of heaven. You're going to bless the nations. You want to be blessed with Abraham and his descendants and be a part of that? You want to be a part of what Daniel saw, the saints of God who inherit the kingdom that the Son of Man lets them share in? You want to be what Moses said the people of God couldn't be because they failed and he couldn't mediate? You want to be a part of this? You trust in the Son. And he's looking at Nicodemus face to face in all of his pharisaical religious glory and going, you need me. With all the sacrifices you try, I've come to fix that. You all have messed it up. The temple system has become something it was not supposed to be. The way you're sacrificing, the way you've allowed pagan ideologies and Hellenistic culture to taint and interrupt what God has called you to do as the set-apart people, I've come to deal with it. Y'all need to be made new. Jewish, Gentile, young, old, male, female, whatever your economic status, you need to be made new. That's the only way, and the way you're made new is to look to the Son and trust in his name and believe in the Son, the way that Israel was desperate to look at that bronze serpent. And verse 19 says, this is the judgment, though. The light has come into the world. There's that new creation language. That light penetrates the darkness. The problem is, people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. And this is not just talking about, oh, you tolerate sin as a believer, you struggled from it. This is talking about someone's mode of existence, someone's condition of existing is darkness. They don't want to come out because their works are evil. They don't want to be exposed. They love their sin. They love evil. They don't want light. Verse 20, everyone who does wicked things hates the light and doesn't come to the light lest his works should be exposed. Light has come into the world. Genesis chapter 1. Jesus is the great spiritual light that brings eternal life and brings us back into the tree of life himself, relationship with the Father, but people don't want it. You like your religion, you like your burnt offerings, you like your temple system, you like your pharisaical titles and status, you like it all, you don't want to come, you're comfortable, it's convenient, I get it, you don't want me, but if you want to come to the light, it's available. If you want to get out of sin, it's available. But people don't want to come to the light lest their works should be exposed because their works are evil. And this just screams Genesis 3. Adam and Eve hiding in their nakedness, trying to cover themselves. God's coming. Let's hide behind a tree. They don't want to come to the light because of the fact they just fell into sin. And that makes perfect sense. If Jesus is going to reference us to any story to say we need to be fixed, it's going to be Genesis 3. That would make the most sense. Where this whole thing got messed up, I'm bringing us back by fixing it through their mistakes. I've come to deal with your mistakes starting from Adam and Eve to bring us back into the garden where light and life and relationship and abundance exists in relationship with God. There's only one way to the Father, and it's through me, Jesus says. The problem is Nicodemus doesn't see his need to come to the light because he's got it all. He's in the Sanhedrin. He's one of the Pharisees. He's got status, got the money, got the knowledge, got the information, got the crowds, got the credentials. I know you're a teacher that's doing some cool things. And Jesus is going, let me just blow your tiny little mind by bringing Daniel's vision, Genesis 22, Bronze Serpent, Passover, you name it. Exodus 32, Moses trying to deal with people. So I'm going to bring it all together right now for you. And I am what all of those stories are pointing to, and all of those characters could not be for humanity. He's saying, I'm that. You see it? The judgment is that people don't come to the light. In Torah, Old Testament, there's a bunch of statements, verses about the commandments of God being light. Give attention to me, my people. Give ear to me, my nation. A law will go out from me, and I will set justice for a light to the peoples. Right? So for a first century Jewish Pharisee hearing Jesus talk, light for them meant their Torah, commandments, instruction. Your word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. The word of God tells me how to live. Verse 130, the unfolding of your word gives light. It imparts understanding to the simple. Is that true? Sure. Proverbs 6:23, the commandment is a lamp and the teaching is a light. And the reproofs are discipline in the way of life. Psalm 119, the heavens declare the glory of God. Day to day pours out speech and reveals knowledge. And then we have this statement about the law of God. It's perfect. It revives the soul and makes wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever, more to be desired than gold, sweeter than honeycomb. Who can discern his errors? Keep back your servant from presumptuous sins. Let the words of my mouth. This whole chapter is littered with the word of God shines. And we stop at the, it guides me on how to live, and don't get to the point where, oh, the entire standard of God's, this entire standard of God, his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, his instructions, it's pointing me to my need for someone to make me new. because I can't fulfill everything that you see perfectly. I can't perfectly do that. I need to be born again in order to be guided by the light of God's law, so I can begin living from that place. And then in my lifestyle, God is leading me by his word. But first I need to be born again. So the problem is people don't want to be born again. They want to do what God has commanded in their own limited human strength. Fallible, limited, separated from God, in darkness. They want to try and follow the light in a very surface level, shallow way that doesn't bring abundant life, but just shows them and exposes the fact that they don't have what it takes. And they want to stop there. And this is what Jesus says all throughout John. You guys have stopped at the law. Let me take you to John chapter 5 to show you. Over and over. He says, don't think I will accuse you to the Father. That's why Jesus says, I haven't come to condemn. I don't need to. You are already condemned standing under Moses, standing under Torah. You've set your hope on the thing that actually keeps you in jail. You can have that guide your life and be your light once you've come to the light of Jesus and be born again. Now you can walk out the commands and instructions of God and enjoy walking in the light. If you believed Moses, you'd believe me. In fact, he says this earlier. You guys search the scriptures thinking you have life in them. Not just in a knowledge of them, not just in having them, but in trying to do them, you think you have life. But the scriptures bear witness about Jesus, yet you refuse to come to me so that you can have real life. Life is not achieved, life is given as a free gift. And Jesus is saying, whoever does what is true comes to the light. Whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen his works are carried out in God. You have two kinds of people. People that are living in the darkness don't want to come to the light, but maybe want to play around with the Word of God or the Scriptures or Torah and play around with let it guide me when it's time. And sure, you can experience temporary light in certain areas of your life, because wisdom works. But then there are people, so those people don't come to Jesus because they're okay with just the surface level wisdom and instruction in the Word of God, and they don't want Jesus. They don't want to admit their need and their inability and their helplessness and desperation. Then there are people who realize I'm helpless and I want to follow God and I need to be made new. So I'm going to trust in Christ and look to him as my true Savior and Messiah and the Son of Man who approaches the Ancient of Days as my high priest. I look to him to make me new, to pay for my sins, to die my death, to raise to life 3 days later in my place so I could approach the Father through him. I trust in him. And then through that, my works are carried out in God. And I love that. This is not Jesus saying, guys, stop doing works. He's saying, no. You have to be in the light first to have your works truly be carried out in God. Whoever does, there's a category of people here. Whoever does what is true. Whoever comes to the light. Whoever believes in Jesus. I will end here, I promise. The Calvinistic theology says God himself chooses who will believe in him and who will not. He decides for everyone that will ever exist who will believe and who will not. And yet Jesus here says, whoever does what is true comes to the light. So there is a kind of person that is likely to come to the light. That doesn't mean this person lives perfectly. Everyone is a sinner and falls short of grace. But there is a general trajectory and pursuit that is for God, for good, whatever you call that. And God brings the gospel, just like the centurion, or rather the leader of the Roman cohort, I believe, in Acts. Who was the first Gentile to get saved, guys? Come on, my brain is gone. Who was the first Gentile to be saved and born again and filled with the Spirit? Come on, drop the name. What's his name? Cornelius. That man was seeking God. That man was pursuing God. Was he born again and filled with the Spirit? No. but God brought his son. And this is the beautiful thing about Jesus. There's two categories in John. There are those who believe and those who don't. There are those who love the light and love the darkness. People are predisposed by their own general decisions. People are predisposed to believing or not. That doesn't mean people who are in the darkness can't ever get to the place where they're actually open to the light. But what I'm saying is, everyone is essentially, we need Jesus. We're dead in sin. We can do nothing for ourselves. But some people are predisposed to wanting the light, while others aren't, simply because of where they're at. We've heard testimony after testimony like this, where people are like, I hated God my whole life, then all of a sudden he broke me, and yeah, you came to the place where you were actually open to what God wanted to do in your life, and you actually had this disposition of wanting life and realizing your helplessness. And there are people who are doing what is true, not in like a... There are two ways to read this, okay? I'm reading it as both people, those who are doing what is true and those who are doing wicked things. Both people need to come to the light that is Jesus for salvation, right? There's another way to read this, which is that no, those who are doing what is true are already born again, trust in Jesus, and they're coming to the light like on a frequent daily basis. I think both work. But what's more likely for me when I read this is if they're coming to the light, that assumes they need it in the first place. And if they're already doing what is true, this kind of breaks the Calvinistic category, if I may be so bold, which is that there is such a thing as a person who is doing what is true. Their general lifestyle is in pursuit of good and light, and they're predisposed to believing in Jesus when they hear the gospel. Like they're set up, they're positioned, their disposition is one of reception, and they're ready. And there are those who are still in the darkness who are not ready. And I don't know how you have that kind of category in a theological framework that says God decides before you ever exist whether you will believe or whether you will not. I don't know how you have that category there, which is that actually it's up to people and where they're at, whether or not they're likely to receive, and God is not controlling that. That's the person's own general circumstances and disposition and heart attitude and experience. But all this to say, when God so loved the world, he gave his only son. He's doing what Abraham did not have to do. When Jesus came and laid down his life, he's doing what Isaac did not have to do. Jesus is doing what the temple system couldn't do. Jesus is doing what Daniel saw. Jesus is doing what Moses could not do for the nation of Israel. Jesus is doing what God promised to Abraham and the patriarchs. He's the fulfillment. So when it says God loves us, there really is no human category to fully capture the essence of God's love perfectly. You can understand dimensions of it, but when I say God loves you, God loves me. He loves the world. He chose to send him willingly. Jesus chose to descend in order to ascend the mountain that Moses could never do, that Moses could never climb. He chose to come down in order to ascend to the Ancient of Days the way Daniel saw, the way Daniel prophesied. Jesus came down to lay his life fully in humility and sacrifice and surrender to the Father, lay it down in a way that Isaac would not have to. This is how much God loves you. This is how much Jesus loves you. That is John 3:16. Is all of this backstory that builds to what he's saying. It's profound. It's profound. And when you meditate on it, when you sit with this, when you study this, it really does dramatically improve your understanding of how much God loves you and what it means that he loves you. Is that God planted seeds all throughout the Old Testament of what his love would look like, fully bloomed in his Son, fully grown in his Son's sacrifice and resurrection and burial and death and ascension. This is all about Jesus. Do you want the light? Do you want to come to the light? Being in the light means you are born again. And he's made way for that so we can inherit the kingdom, see the kingdom, be a part of the kingdom, judge angels with him, be a part of new creation with him, be a child of God with him. That's how much Jesus loves us, how much God loves us, is that it is not the will of the Father that any should perish. And that's wild. And then we will continue in John. We'll finish John chapter 3 next week, Lord willing. I'm still here. You're still here. We can't control whether or not we are, but we can sure say, Lord, please let us be here. So that is all I have for you guys. I will see you guys on Wednesday, Lord willing, for a Q&A. And I hope this was a blessing. Really let me know in the comments how this blessed you, if at all, what you learned. This is not about information. I do not want this to be about information. And look how they connect. I do this so that there is a deeper, more profound understanding of how much God loves you. How much God loves you. All right? So I'll see you guys Wednesday. Keep moving towards Jesus. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to share your thoughts and your insights in the comments. If you want to share your thoughts and questions about these studies, join us every Thursday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a live discussion together. And thank you for supporting this ministry. Your support helps us accomplish our mission, which is to teach people how to read the Bible so they can live and teach it for themselves. We're only able to make all of these free resources because of generous supporters like you. So thank you very much for all of your support. Make sure to visit AboveReproachMinistry.com to check out all of our free resources. And as always, keep moving towards Jesus.